It's gone 10 and beyond. A full house today, so it's good to see members present. Could I welcome the Cabinet Member for Children and Young People? Always a pleasure to have you with us. You can hear what we say about you rather than seeing it on live streaming.
Yes.
But you're more than welcome.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
I'd also like to embarrass my Vice Chair by wishing her a very happy birthday today. And I have my fingers crossed this morning because it doesn't take a great deal of observance, but I just hope that Mom and Baby don't share the same birthday. If we could start in our usual way and just make introductions so that the millions watching on live streaming will know who we are. I'm Martin Grocott. I'm the member for Lansdowne Ward in Abergavenny, and I chair this committee.
Laura Jones, Vice Chair, member for Wisham.
Richard John, Cabinet Member for Children and Young People.
Hazel Eilert, Scrutiny Manager.
Wendy Barnard, Democratic Services Officer.
I'm Roger Thurbeck. I'm Head of the Sensory and Communication Support Service.
Leanne Wakely, I'm the Chair of the Monmouthshire Association of School Governors.
Mike Fowler, Parent Governor Representative.
Maureen Powell, Councillor for Castle Ward and Abergavenny and a member of this committee.
Jo Watkins, member of this committee, Councillor for Caldecott Castle.
Hayley Davis-Edwards, I work for the Education Achievement Service.
Helen Power, also from Education Achievement Service, and I'm PCA for Monmouthshire.
Good morning, Bonadad, David Jones, member for the Recording Ward and a member of this committee.
Good morning, Councillor Watts. I'm gate crashing this morning.
Bonadad, good morning. Tudor Thomas, member for Priory Ward, Abergavenny, and a member of this committee.
Pete Strong, National Education Union.
Councillor Louise Brown, member of this committee, Sharnoot Moore. Thank you.
Malcolm Lane, member of this committee, Mardy Ward.
Morning, Sheila Woodhouse, member for Grovefield in Abergavenny and of this committee.
Nikki Wellington, Finance Manager for Children and Young People.
Thank you all very much. Let's crack on with the agenda then. And the first item are apologies for absence. Have we got any apologies?
Chairman, there's no apologies for absence today.
Looking around, the great and the good of the committee are all assembled, which is very nice to see. Item 2, has anybody a need to declare any interests before the business gets underway? Item 3, there are no members of the public who wish to address our committee. So moving quickly on then to item 4, I'd like to welcome Roger Thurbeck. I'm sorry you weren't able to come to our last meeting, but in a sense it's probably much better that you're here today because I don't think I'll steal your thunder by saying we are now in happier times. So over to you, Roger.
First of all, again, I'd like to send my apologies for not being able to make the meeting last time, and also to thank the Council for their supportive comments at the meeting in December. That was very much welcomed by my team. I believe that you've been through the presentation I presented last time. So I think the narrative has changed somewhat, but I just wanted to start a little bit about talking about my team, Sensory and Communication Support Service, or SENCOM. We are 3 highly specialist teams within one service, and we recognise that each of those teams has very unique set of skills and experiences that we offer the region. And we work across the 5 authorities as it stands, and have done historically for many, many years. The 3 teams, as I'm sure you're aware, are the COMIT team, the Communication Intervention team, which support children with speech, language and communication needs. They tend to work more on a short-term basis, either 1 or 2 terms within a school, providing advice, support and direct teaching. and also helping to skill and develop the expertise within school settings as well to support that children with those particular needs. My hearing impaired service support children 0 to 19 currently, and with the new ALN legislation we're looking at how we support 0 to 25 as well. And they support children with a range of different types of hearing losses, from very mild hearing losses to profound hearing losses which have significant impact on language development and learning. And my other team is the visually impairment service. They support children again 0 to 19, providing a range of different types of intervention for a range of different needs, and they also support children who have a multisensory impairment, so a visual and a hearing impairment as well. We're all based in one building in Cwmbran. The three teams, as I say, historically have worked regionally. Historically, until about the last 3 years ago, they worked independent of each other, with two services being hosted by Torfaen, County Borough Council, and one service by Caerphilly. When I came into post 3 years ago, one of my jobs was to actually bring us all together to have one service and to bring us into one host authority, which we achieved in February of last year, where we're all now hosted by Torfaen County Borough Council on behalf of the region. And we benefit from being regional because we have peaks and troughs in terms of the numbers of children that we support. That can go up almost on a daily basis, and it can go down as well because of some of the nature of our losses are temporary, others are more permanent. So we benefit from efficiencies of scale in that respect, but actually being together now as one service means that we share our professional skills as well, and we have developed really strong links between the three teams and work very closely together in terms of professional development, but also working together where one or more teams might be working with an individual pupil in a school. So we actually try to provide a more streamlined support service for schools and families as well. And we offer, as I say, a range of different activities. So we work in all types of educational settings, from early years, nurseries, schools, special schools, and sixth form centres as well. We also provide a range of early intervention opportunities for families and preschool children at our centre at Brecon House in Cwmbran, where we provide a range of specialist preschool opportunities, which are really designed not only to provide support and intervention for the children, but to offer families the opportunity to meet with each other, to share their experiences, and we know that families greatly value that as well. So that's a little bit about what we do on the ground, as it were. But obviously, as you know, we've been going through a change management process over the last few months, with Newport on the 1st of October giving us notice that they wished to withdraw from our collaborative agreement, and that they would be setting up their own service from after the 31st of March this year. So those timescales have been challenging for us. It has meant we've had to go through a significant change management process in terms of looking at how many staff we would need for a service that provides opportunities for the 4 remaining authorities that would want to stay with us. We had gone through that process. We had reached a stage where staff knew what their outcomes of that change management process would be, whether that they would be going to be staying with us, whether they would be trooping across to the new service that was going to be started in Newport, or whether they were facing a redundancy situation. And overall, we were looking at having to lose 16 members of staff through different options I've just explained there. We'd completed that process as staff knew that what was going to be their outcome, ready for the end of March or the end of April for some of the staff as well. But as you probably aware, last week Newport gave an offer that they would like to defer that withdrawal for 12 months while a review of the service that we provide was put in place. That has, if I'm honest, has created some significant uncertainty again for our staff. They had just started to come to terms as to what was going to be happening with them, and as far as I know, and you may be able to help me with any further news, that is the state that we are currently in. We don't actually know where, if that offer is accepted, or if there's some negotiations about that. But as it stands, my team don't know what the future holds just at this point in time. So I think that brings us up to date with where we are at the moment. As I say, we are in a state of uncertainty, to be honest, some instability as well. My absence level of staff has gone up over the last week or so. I have 6 members of staff away at the moment. 5 of those are directly related to the change management and process that we face at the moment. So my team are incredibly professional. They're showing great fortitude, but we are a team that needs some stability moving forward and some clear guidance on how we are to operate in the future. Okay, I think that's all I need to say at the moment, but I'm more than happy to take questions.
Thank you very much indeed, Roger. I think before we go any further, one thing that we could do as a committee is to make it very clear that we hope that negotiations will take place as soon as possible to ensure that your staff are not left in the terrible position that they find themselves in now. So could we put that down as an immediate action point? I'd also make the point that I hope you will relay to your staff that as a county council, Monmouthshire was unanimous across all parties and none in support of your service. Right, colleagues, questions or comments to the head of service? Mr. Strong.
Yeah, given that this is a deferment rather than a cancellation, and given that the very strong consensus here is that the best outcome would be for Newport to remain within the service, clearly Newport's view of the situation needs to be addressed. Is it possible, without indulging in any mudslinging or anything like that, to give us an explanation of Newport's perspective on this that led them to make that initial decision? I think we need to know this so that the negotiations could be successful.
I think, with respect, that that's a political question. I'll do my best to answer it from the perception that I've got, having read letters sent by the leader of Newport Council, Councillor Wilcox. She has said that the view of Newport was that they could deliver an equivalent service at less cost that would benefit the people of Newport. I think that's the bottom line. It was no more than that. Her political view was that the service would be of an equivalent nature, but could be delivered at less cost if Newport ran its own service. I think subsequently the view in Newport might now have changed somewhat. But I think that is a political question, and so I hope members think it proper that I don't put the head of the service on the spot. But that is politically the answer that Newport have given thus far down the line. Councillor Brown.
Yes, thank you, Chair. You mentioned about it being deferred for 12 months. What does that mean in terms of staffing then? Thank you.
If that goes ahead and that's agreed, we go back to our original staffing complement as we were last September, which was 46 staff across the 3 teams. The change management process will be suspended, so we have issued redundancy notices for staff that require those, so those would be rescinded. The staff that have been identified to TUPE across to the new service, that process would stop as well. until further developments for us. Okay.
Councillor Watt.
Chair, if no one else has got, because I am a guest here, so I should be last, really. You're fine. Right, thank you. You remember we had a conversation, I think it was on the Thursday after that it was announced it was the day of the meeting or the morning of the meeting. And I think you then sent me an email. I asked for a brief on it so I could be informed about potentially what the risks are. Well, and you've rightly identified some of the risks here, but could you give a more definitive answer into what the day-to-day service would look like? I know you elaborated that, and you were very, very good about it in your email, and we discussed it. You were very patient with me because I knew nothing about the service. What that might look like had it happened. Obviously, it hasn't. My other question is also relating to the amount of money that we put in. We put in our equivalent, our lot. We don't pay any more, we don't pay any less. I still don't understand, if Newport pull out their bit, how that factors on us, other than that there might be a dilution of expertise. And you talked about that because you shared that with me, that we bring in that all the expertise tends to come from England, which leads me into my final question. Is there anything stopping us then finding new partners in this? I know that, for example, and I know some people will ease off about Bristol again, but Bristol City Council have a superb service. They have a great hearing impaired service, and I know enough about it to say that with confidence. Is there anything stopping us looking for new partners in this, in developing that service and dragging in a greater pool of expertise, bearing in mind that all our current expertise is sourced from England?
Okay, so just to start with the first question about what it would look on the ground if the change management process was put into place. Directors were very clear with us from the 4 remaining authorities that they wanted us to continue in the way that CENCOM is developing. So CENCOM provides a service that gives advice, it gives support, but it also provides teaching input as well. And I think that's one of the unique features that we are able to offer, because other services may not be able to offer that teaching support. They may just be able to offer advice, similar services to ours across Wales and across England as well. So the way that we set about looking at how we continue that is we did some looking at our data in terms of the prediction of the numbers that we have in Monmouthshire, for example, and the other 3 authorities, and looked at what our trends were like over the last 3 years, and then set about what are our time inputs that we would needed for the whole range of pupils that we support, because for some pupils it might be quite light touch. For other pupils, we may be in 2 or 3 times a week to support those pupils and the needs within that particular school. So based on the data, we came up with a staffing structure that tried to retain a range of the skills and experiences that we currently have within our service. So we have teachers who have specialist qualifications, mandatory qualifications in hearing impairment and visual impairment and multisensory impairment. We wanted to hold on to that element. We have habilitation officers that support our blind pupils in developing their independent living skills and finding routes around schools. We wanted to retain that. But we also have a very strong body of specialist teaching assistants that provide excellent support into schools, and we wanted to try and hold on to as many of those as we possibly could as well. We also are very lucky in that we have a very strong service level agreement with the Health Board. We have a speech and language therapist that's embedded in our team that provides amazing support across the teams, but mainly for COMET. We wanted to retain those elements as well. So we looked at how we could balance the budget but maintain a range of those skills and experiences in our pool that we could offer the 4 remaining authorities. So that's how we came up with the structure that we'd planned to do. And then obviously we would be losing skill and experience, but we felt we also, my team a lot of them have been in the service for many, many years. It's their passion, it's where they're at, what they want to do, and that's where they want to stay. So we still would be retaining an awful lot of experience. But obviously, with losing potentially 16 staff in that particular scenario, it would mean for schools and families there could potentially be changes in personnel. So for some of our children, we may have them from 3 or 4 weeks old, from newborn hearing screening, right the way up to 19, and they get to know our staff incredibly well. So we would have to be going through a transition process with those children and families to say, actually, you're going to have a different member of staff. We need to support you in getting to know that member of staff so we can continue the support that you're being provided with. Okay. So that would certainly be an impact for the 4 remaining authorities. I think we had a service structure that would have managed the caseload that we had predicted. But what we have, as it currently stands, when we have 5 rather than 4 authorities, is we have some resilience in our team to manage some of those fluctuations of caseload that we have. And I think that's the area that I think would be our concern moving forward. What would be our longer term resilience? If we had an influx of children with a particular visual impairment condition in a particular area, would we be able to, we'd have to start looking at how we prioritise our time and support in greater detail. In terms of developing links with other services, I know Bristol very well. I have great links with Bristol as well. In fact, I was part of an inspection that helped develop and move that service forward as well, actually. We're always looking for professional partnerships. I think if we're in a scenario where we have 4 rather than 5 authorities, I'll go back to my previous point, is actually at this point we need consolidation, and we need time to regroup and build a firm and strong service for the 4 remaining authorities, and then perhaps we can look more outward.
I wonder if from the chair I could make a comment as well, because I think there was a political element to the question, just as there was in the last question, and I would point out that education in Wales is devolved to the Welsh Government. And that services in Wales to education are delivered by the Welsh Government and Welsh local authorities. I can understand that if you live in Chepstow, you might feel a kinship to Bristol. I'm not sure that would be the case if you lived in Ystrad which is also covered by the CENCOM service. So while I take the point that there is expertise in Bristol, I think we have considerable expertise in Wales, and that we should look to be a Welsh service serving the people of a country with its own devolved government. So, Councillor Watts, I'm not surprised you want to come back.
Sorry, I didn't want to labour the point, Chair, or be political in any way. I know you think I might be, but there was a genuine innocence in that question. But my point was, Chair, is that we do really drag in all our level of expertise, really. All the staff, I believe, are trained in England. And am I right in
No, I think in terms of the mandatory qualifications for the specialist qualifications for our teachers, currently there are only universities within England and Scotland actually that provide that training. In terms of my overall staff, the training is very much localised and Welsh based, and they did used to be mandatory qualification training within Wales. Actually, I'm a product of that, but there currently isn't. So that's why in the last few years we've had to look at England for that type of training.
That's it, Chair.
Yes, thank you. I think obviously one of the obvious concerns is in relation to the people who receive the service, and if there's, you mentioned that there was some resilience within the service, which is obviously good in terms of caseload and so forth. But the basic question is really, I think people who access the service, one of their concerns is to make sure that the level of time and hours and so forth for their particular need, for their particular child isn't in any way curtailed, and perhaps you could, I don't know whether you've done an analysis at that sort of level, but I think you know, in a sense, if you have, that may provide some reassurance, although as you've said, you need the resilience in case there is an increase in people who need that, have that particular need. So perhaps you could answer that, I suppose more than anything, a fairly basic question in terms of, staffing and time and so forth. Thank you.
Yeah, we have obviously looked very closely, particularly at the children who take a lot of our resources and need a lot of our resources in terms of the time and the specialist equipment that we provide, and that we're confident that those are the children that we will be needing to prioritise and focus on. In terms of the children that have mild level of losses, but also that mild level of loss has impact on learning. Over the last 2 years, we've also been looking at how we develop our support for those sorts of children as well, and have developed our range of training that we offer for schools and for early years settings. We've also looked at the way that we develop our communication with schools so that we can make sure that we keep closer eye in terms of those children that we may not see as regularly as some of the other children with higher levels of need. And that journey needs to continue for us, and we need to continue to develop our links with schools and build on that even further, so that schools feel more confident that they can manage those milder levels of loss as well, but also that they know that we're there for them when they need us as well.
Any other comments? Councillor John would like to say a few words.
Thank you. I'm really grateful to you for coming in today, and I must say I feel terrible for your staff who, I can only imagine the impact that this is all this disruption is having on their morale, on their well-being and their families. And I can't think of a more rewarding job, to be honest. I mean, I'm sure we all take pride in the work we do, but to have a job where you help profoundly deaf or blind children to communicate with their parents, and the sheer joy that must bring to the parents of those children, being able to communicate with their children for the first time. And we heard very passionately from the mother of Lola, who came to talk to us in December, and she must be about 6 months old now, and it really brought to life this debate for us. And I know many members across the chamber spoke really passionately about the impact that the service has. I mean, I have to pay particular tribute to Councillor Petruni, who brought the motion forward. And on behalf of the entire authority, we're 100% committed to this service and to hopefully finding a way in which it can remain a Gwent-wide service that, and I know from speaking to my opposite numbers in Caerphilly and Blaenau Gwent and in Torfaen, they share that view that we believe we can offer a more resilient service with a greater breadth of professionalism by working in partnership with our neighbours. So I really hope we can do that. And while we were pleased to see that Newport are rethinking their proposals, we're not out of the woods yet. They've simply delayed for 12 months, and I appreciate that brings even greater uncertainty to your staff, to people who depend on this service. And I know that leaders of the other 4 authorities have been in touch with the leader in Newport to request an urgent meeting, so that while we're happy to review the service, we want to be able to provide certainty both to your staff and to people who depend on this vital service as soon as we possibly can. I'm sure that's reflected, across all the both members of this committee and members of Monmouthshire.
Thank you very much indeed. To sum up, before we move on, I think, okay, Councillor Brown, quickly, because it's quite a long agenda.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I fully support what the Cabinet member has said, and, obviously for the benefit of both the staff and service users of it, the sooner it's resolved and, hopefully deferred indefinitely, the better. But certainly endorse what Councillor Richard John has just said, and I presume the committee would feel the same, but obviously I can't speak for the whole committee, but if anybody wants to say anything different, that's fine, thank you.
I can confirm from the dais here the number of nodding heads that I think we have unanimous support for the comments of our Cabinet Member for Education. Summing up, we've already agreed that we will ask members of our Cabinet to liaise as quickly and as thoroughly as possible to get a very clear way forward for the sake of the staff of the service, if nothing else. Of course, we focus all the time on the needs of children, but the staff have got to have that confidence that they're going to be in a job this time next year to help them to do the best job they can. So I think that we're agreed that's one thing we can do. Could I suggest that a second thing we can do is to write to Kirsty Williams as the relevant Minister for Education and actually put in a plea that those mandatory qualifications that are needed to work at levels within services like CENCOM are restored in Welsh universities, rather than having to go to Bristol or elsewhere to get that qualification. Would that seem to be a useful thing to do? Again, I'm seeing quite a lot of nodding heads, and I think I've probably just given myself an extra job to do. But this service, members may remember that at the County Council, I spoke to say that when I was on the other side of the fence and an officer in Gwent, I did a lot of the research and wrote the reports that set up 2 of the 3 services that are now in CENCOM, the hearing and the visual impairment services, and they're very dear to my heart as a result of that very personal involvement that I had with establishing them in the first place. So I would be more than happy to write on behalf of this committee to maintain the strength of provision within Wales. Yeah. Okay, Roger, could I thank you very much for coming, and as a committee, you've seen the reaction this morning. You clearly have our fullest support, and we hope that issues can be resolved as quickly as possible. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much for your time. Very much appreciated. Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Wellington, you're coming down to the front, advancing in a stealthy manner through the serried ranks of committee in order we can move on to agenda item 5. And that bit of flannel has given Miss Wellington a chance to get down to the front. This is an item about a proposal to change the funding formula for our special school, Mountain House. So when you're ready.
Thank you very much, Chair, and good morning to everybody. Just to go through the sort of history of this document and to give you a bit of background, and then obviously Select Committee are part of the consultees of this document, so we will be recording obviously your feedback on that, and that will feed into the paper that will go forward later on this week in terms of any decision that needs to be made. The current funding for Mountain House Special School was reviewed in 2015. Members of the committee at that time will remember that we took 250,000 from Mountain House at that time, and the school produced a recovery plan to enable them to bring them back into surplus. They are in a surplus position at the moment, so they have exceeded that recovery plan, which is very good news. At that point, the funding was reduced to support 42 pupils, which included 18 residential at the time. Or the funding included 18 residential, I should say. There weren't 18 residential pupils at the time. Currently, in Mountain House, there's 21 pupils on roll, 2 of which are residential and 7 of which reside within Monmouthshire County Council. The consultation has been to the School Funding Forum, and some of you are members of the forum and that went to the last meeting. We asked permission to go out to consult on this. The proposal is to reduce 275,000 of the current funding for Mountain House School. The consultation has been open for 4 weeks. So far we've had 3 responses. Consultation closes tomorrow. I am expecting some more responses later on today and tomorrow. The responses received so far are from 1 councillor and 2 governing bodies, broadly in favour of the proposal. Can I just make it clear to members that obviously the funding has been looked at and the school will still be able to meet all statutory ratios that are required around staffing and residential element. That won't be affected at all. And I have met with the head and started discussions around if we were to do this, how would they affect the school, and just open that dialogue ready to move forward on that. So I'm happy now to take any questions or comments.
Mr. Fowler.
Morning. I wholly support changing the formula to make it that the funding is appropriate to needs and requirements of the schools. That bit I have absolutely no question about and behind that. Where it starts to feel icky for me is where we're changing the formula, which is how the pot of money for education gets divided up, but we're using this to put 275 out of education and back into MCC to help them settle the books. If it's a change for the formula, to my mind, that's just how we divvy up the pot of education, which, as we know, we've been given a flatline amount of money, and this is just looking at better ways of distributing it rather than sucking it out of the service.
You'll be aware through the budget setting process, obviously there was a gap within the difference between the funding for Monmouthshire County Council and the costs required to run the services. Education are required to make a contribution to that gap. Number of options that were considered. Obviously, we could have top sliced it off the ISB, which has not been favourable in the past. Looking at objectively at the schools, this school has seen a number of pupils, the number of pupils reduced significantly. You'll also be aware that the formula that supports schools is primarily calculated on the numbers of pupils. To me, this seemed like the logical area rather than top slice it off all schools, which obviously all schools would then have an effect of the reduction.
Okay, Councillor Brown.
Yeah, I think it's difficult to comment on in view of not knowing the reaction of the head and the governing body. I don't know whether you can make any comments on that. In terms of the figures themselves, there doesn't seem to be, it talks about total funding, and unless I've missed it, and I obviously I could have done, is, you know, where are the, because you do actually get paid pupil costs for, you know, out-of-county pupils, and that doesn't seem to be included unless I've missed it. Could you point out if that's the case or not? And if so, what am I missing on that particular point? Thank you.
In terms of your first point, I haven't received a formal response from the governing body at the moment. In terms of the consultation, I am obviously expecting that. As I said, the consultation is still open. I will be anticipating that I'll get a response in from the school with regard to that. I have met with the head teacher right at the start of this, it was only right and proper that I did meet with the head teacher and discuss it with her. Over the last 12 months, given the number of pupils that have dropped, there has been some staff that have left the school, either through obtaining other positions or through retirement. So there is, certain savings that can be made without looking at redundancies that will naturally through to next year's budget. In terms of the out-of-county income that we receive, that's actually held centrally. So we fund the school in full, and we actually get the income in centrally. You'll recall when I do the monthly monitoring or the quarterly monitoring with you, that is a pressure for us at the moment. The number of out-of-county pupils has significantly dropped, and it is causing a pressure on our central budgets at the moment in terms of that.
I think the difficulty is obviously there's a total funding figure, and we can't really work out what the real total funding figure is if we don't know what the income coming actually is. So I think in terms of the cost of the service, we actually don't have the proper figures on it, and I think that's a comment that I made when there was a previous consultation beforehand, because obviously I know that you've got to sort of provide lines and columns and so forth, but in terms of running costs, because there's no income costs, the total funding actually is probably higher than actually put in the figures that we've got before us. Thank you.
The total funding forecast for this year is 756,000 on the for Mountain House School. It is anticipated that next year, having looked at the budgets, that will drop off again significantly, probably down to about 350,000.
Councillor Thomas.
Sorry, that hasn't answered the question. I mean, basically what I'm looking at in terms of simple maths is, you've got the total funding and you've got the formulas and so forth, and you've come up with a sum, and you've come up obviously with a reduced sum in view of the running costs are obviously standard, but then you've got the sort of the per pupil emotional and behavioural difficulties, which is one of the main columns that is going down on that figure. But what I'm saying is that it's basically in very simple terms, if you were having a shop or something, it wouldn't be just your running costs, it would be the amount of income and profit you got coming in. And so we don't know the answer to that question. So it's not what the total funding that is allocated to it. What it is how do we reduce that figure by the per pupil out of county money that we get coming in? And I haven't had an answer to that.
Sorry if I'm misunderstanding your question. The funding that we give to the school is the 1,559,000. Centrally, we recoup from other authorities 756,000. So the net of the school, if you look at it, is 803,000. That's the net running costs of the school. Now, obviously, and it's very clear in the consultation paper, I've taken the 275,000 for ease off one line in the section 52, which was the emotional behaviour, and that was detailed within the consultation paper. If we move forward the next year, obviously the running costs, the funding will come down by 275,000, and at this current stage we are anticipating that the income will drop to about 350,000.
Is that okay? I'll give you a few minutes to tumble over those figures. If you want to come back, I'll bring you back in later. I wonder if sorry, Councillor Thomas.
I just wanted to ask, it's not really, finance in a way, but I'm just rather surprised that the number of pupils in Mountain House, I'm not that familiar with the school, it's not an area of my county, but I'm just surprised that the numbers are going down when nationally, and certainly in my former job with the exam board, and I was in charge of special consideration and access, all of those applications of children with particular needs continued to go up because we've got much better diagnostic systems in place today than we had, say, 20 years ago. So I'm very surprised that both within the authority and from other authorities, we've now gone down to 21 pupils there. One would have expected that number to have risen. Are they being kept in maintained schools with support, or are they going elsewhere? I'm just surprised at this big drop in number.
It's not a kind of year-on-year sudden big drop in number. We've seen the numbers decline over a period of time in Mountain House. I think, as I've said to this committee previously, the designation and the very restricted nature of Mountain House, i.e. only boys, only of a secondary age, doesn't help that. At the same time, we've seen our neighbouring authorities put in place provision, enhanced provision around SEBD or PRS type solutions. So that will have had an impact on the number of children who are flowing through to Mountain House. Clearly, I think the general appetite amongst local authorities is to support children in mainstream. Inclusive education, I think, is seen, glancing at my colleagues to my right, is seen as a kind of a key component of what a good school looks like. So we are beginning to see changes in the practice of what inclusion and inclusive practice in schools looks like. So that has some impact. Clearly, Mountain House is a school as well, which has been through a difficult history in the recent past. That will have an impact on the confidence of placing authorities. I know the journey that school has been on and how positive that's been. And some of the practice we see there is very, very strong. So it's a difficult one to answer in that sense, but clearly, the number and the placing authorities is declining. Obviously, South West England has placed significant numbers of children there in the past. Costs are obviously a pressure there as well. So we're just seeing all of those things kind of come along at the same time.
Thank you. I see no further hands up. I'll come back to you in a moment, Councillor Brown. I'd like to follow up with Mr. Fowler's question. At our last month's meeting of this committee, we looked at budget proposals. And there was some criticism from this committee about the proposal in the budget papers to get rid of the specific learning difficulty service. Subsequently, the papers that are now being put forward for the budget show that idea has been dropped. What we now have is £275,000 that somehow suddenly looks like it's going to drop into the general budget saving without it having been here for our consultation when we looked at the budget. And I've got concerns that there's a bit of smoke and mirrors going on here. The county has said, right, we will not abolish the specific learning needs service with the savings that would have bought, but instead we will make changes at Mountain House, and I fully understand the reasons why. But if that is part of the education pot, which is what Mr. Fowler was saying, could that money not go to support the 21st Century Schools project, for example, rather than going into just general pot because we have to make savings? And if it's just going into a general pot for savings, why didn't we know about it if numbers have been dropping over a long time, so that could have been discussed in the general budget papers that came here for our last meeting?
Chair, it was in the general budget papers. It's always been a proposal. It's always been there.
And just for clarity, there's a kind of a double consultation process. So it was part of the budget process, and then this is part of a formal process because we are amending the formula.
Right, so the 275,000 reduction has already been widely known and consulted on. Right, in that case, apologies from the chair. Councillor Brown, you wanted to come back over your figures.
Yeah, I think I was just looking at the figures, and obviously you mentioned the first figure in terms of income, and basically then you mentioned a second figure as well, which was lower. Could you tell me, is that due to a significant change in the out-of-county pupils, and what sort of numbers are we talking about? Because I've got in the consultation itself, it mentioned about 21 or something like that at the moment. And so could you explain to me why there's this particular reduction as such? And you know, because I'm a little bit confused about that. Thank you.
So it's literally just the fact that there will be half as many out-of-county children in the school next year than there were this year. That's why the income is half as much.
I suppose you're talking about July, are you? Yeah. Okay, thank you. That clarifies it. Thank you.
Okay, I think that probably brings our discussion to a halt. The recommendation in the report, number 2 in the report, there, paragraph 2, is simply that we should scrutinise and provide feedback. I think that feedback really hinges around whether we support the proposal or not. So could I ask for a vote on that? Do members support the proposals to save the 270? Councillor Brown, quickly.
Yeah, I think I'd like to abstain on that because obviously I don't know the reaction of the school. Thank you.
Okay, that's fine. But as a committee, we have been asked for our view. So vote whether you support the recommendations set out in the report we've had this morning to save £275,000 by amending the formula for allocating the budget. If you approve of that recommendation, please show. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah, 7. If you are opposed to that, could you show? 2. Only members of the committee can vote, Councillor Watt, I'm afraid. A nice try. I
think I'll change my vote to oppose because obviously I should support people in my particular area. Thank you.
Okay, so the recommendation of this committee is that we accept the proposals in the paper for changes in the funding formula for Mountain House. Thank you very much indeed. If we can then move on to our next agenda, and again, welcome to visitors from the Education Achievement Service. This morning's committee is welcoming a range of external expertise. You're always welcome. Our visitors this morning will be addressing the next 2 agenda items, the first of which is the proposed business plan, and I'll ask Ms. Power if she could kick off on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. Boridar, good morning. The purpose of the business plan, the report asks for members to consider the full contents of the draft EAS business plan 2019 to 20 and the local authority annex 2019-20 as part of the regional consultation process. Through this activity, members will ensure the plan enables appropriate support for schools to improve and that all pupils reach their potential across Monmouthshire. So the recommendations, members are asked to take the opportunity to comment on the contents of the business plan as part of the process and provide a written response as appropriate. Members are asked to consider the main strengths and areas for development within Monmouthshire as detailed in the LA Annex and to consider how LA services can be aligned to meet the ambitious targets within the plan, therefore ensuring all pupils meet their full potential. So I will just go through the main points and then take questions at the end. So the EAS is required to submit an annual overarching regional business plan with accompanying annexes for each of the 5 LAs. The business plan outlines the programme of work that is required to continue to accelerate outcomes and provision for children and young people in settings and schools in South East Wales. Going to 3.2, priorities for the plan have been derived from the LA strategic plans, the progress that has been made towards the previous business plan, areas that have been identified as requiring improvements through internal self-evaluation processes, external research and feedback from ESTIN. 3.3. The delivery model for the business plan is on a regional basis. The needs of each school and trends within Monmouthshire are met through bespoke work with each school. The EAS offers a wide range of bespoke support that is based upon best practice. 3.4, the EAS business plan priorities continue to be shaped using the outcomes of external reviews and research. And currently we're learning from the best systems in the world. The EAS are investing in external reviews, for example, different research that the EAS are commissioning. And if you see there in those green boxes, the bottom right-hand corner, there's a section there on a commentary on aspects of the work of the EAS with recommendations for consideration. And currently we are working with Professor Mick Waters on this, developing different models for peer working. And quite a lot of Monmouthshire schools have already been involved in peer working. It will be a direction of the way ahead for schools. And my colleague this morning, Hayley Davis-Edwards, PCA for Newport, is working very closely with Mick on this. And it'll be something we'll be reporting to you in future scrutinies as well. Going into the top left there, the Professional Learning Programme, a research project conducted by Professor David Egan at Cardiff Metropolitan University. That will be something I'm sure Will McLean and I will be talking to you or referring to in future scrutinies. He's undertaken a report in Monmouthshire on rural poverty, looking at how schools are working with the Pupil Development Grant to raise attainment for vulnerable learners and FSM. So that report has just been done, and we'll be working then with him on seeing where the strengths are from that report and also his recommendations for further development for schools, secondary and primary. So some interesting work that's going on. Going to 3.6, the business plan is in the consultation process. You can see the consultees noted below. Going to 3.8, the final version of the plan will be supported by a range of supporting documents also listed. 3.9, the regional focus for improvements for 2019-20 will be to secure further improvement in the following areas: to provide schools and settings access to a wide range of professional learning and advice and guidance to support the successful realisation of the curriculum, the wider reform agenda, implementation of the professional standards for leaders and teachers, and the implementation of the National Self-Evaluation Framework. To facilitate, quality assure effective professional learning opportunities to enable the sharing of best practice within and beyond the region, ensuring all schools and settings have access to evidence-based research to continually improve their practice and aim for excellence. To continue to raise aspiration, improve pupil outcomes, particularly for vulnerable groups, reduce variance, to accelerate improvement in schools and settings where improvement remains too slow, by ensuring earlier intervention and supporting the use of LA statutory powers to accelerate progress. To provide a range of professional learning and bespoke support to reduce the variance within and across identified schools, improve the quality of leadership, teaching and learning, particularly within the secondary phase across all departments. Supporting schools to ensure pupils make appropriate progress in literacy, numeracy and digital skills at all phases. And to embed and refine the regional equity and wellbeing strategy to improve regional multi-agency working, to reduce duplication and to simplify the support offered to schools and settings for disadvantaged learners. To further develop the regional strategy, to develop a self-improving system through the cluster, networks, learning network schools and peer working models. And to work with other middle-tier partners to implement the new arrangements for accountability to ensure a streamlined approach to the reform agenda. Okay, So moving to 3.11, the business plan addresses each local authority's strategic priority that are indicated with an asterisk. And you can see below Monmouthshire's own strategic priorities. And where there is an asterisk against these points, that's where we have a remit. It's the EAS remit. And we will, of course, support with the LA actions as well, which here is reducing the amount of fixed-term exclusions. Improving outcomes of vulnerable groups, including FSM learners, particularly at Key Stage 4, is a focus for the EAS across all authorities, and that is in each improvement strand. So that is a major focus for all. Moving to 3.16, each LA Annex contains an overview of the performance and the main areas for development at LA level, a summary of the scores that require the highest levels of support, inspection outcomes, and an overview of categorisation for the LA. Pupil progress is included for the first time. The EAS will work closely with all key partners to ensure the realisation of this business plan. The implementation of the tiers noted below are embedded in the way we'll continue to work across the sectors. Recently, Welsh Government has communicated to regions and schools that they're now in their interim phase of the reform journey, now looking to use data more at school level. Welsh Government has requested that no figures are aggregated beyond school level. This doesn't mean schools won't set targets or be challenged on them. Individual targets will still be set. To help schools during this interim year, we have worked with directors regarding important ways of scrutinising. For example, looking at progress data, looking at the quality of self-evaluation and school improvement planning, the pace of progress, especially in red and amber schools or those in ESTIN categories. And we can talk to you about all of this in future scrutinies too. So 3.17, how does the EAS support schools to identify and address their school improvement priorities? Through funding, the EAS has invested in building capacity of schools and educational settings within the region over the last 5 years to enable more collaborative ways of working. This is helping teachers and leaders to learn from each other, try out new approaches, and to engage with educational research as the backdrop for improvement. So across the region, there are now a variety of ways in which the EAS supports and challenges school improvement. The day has gone where it may be just one challenge advisor going into school. There is a lot more now school-to-school support, leaders supporting leaders, teachers supporting teachers across schools. And in Monmouthshire, there is a lot of that going on where we have schools supporting each other. We have Monmouthshire schools supporting others in other parts of the region. And we have Monmouthshire schools who are in receipt of support from other schools as well. Currently, we have schools over Mono. They are supporting other schools in Welsh at the moment. We have UNDI supporting schools in foundation phase. And we have USC supporting schools in leadership development. So this is working well. We are reviewing how it's working, and this will be a future way of school-to-school work as well. So we still have the role of the challenge advisor in supporting, brokering and challenging the pace of progress schools make in addressing their identified school priorities. The role of EAS officers, including subject-specific support for governors, well-being and equity, in supporting brokering and challenging the pace of progress schools make in addressing their identified school priorities. Access to funded school networks. I've just talked about UNDI and the other schools. They are learning network schools, supporting all aspects of professional development and school improvement focused on improving the quality of leadership, teaching and learning. Access to a wide range of professional learning, some with accreditation options for teaching assistants, teachers, school leaders and governors. Peer working and peer reviews. The use of trained and accredited coaches and mentors for teachers and leaders sourced from within and beyond, and access to e-learning materials and high-quality resources. And we're offering sessions for members on all of this. Ed Price from the EAS has already taken several sessions for other LAs on the systems and the structures that we're using. So if you're interested in that, please let us know and we can offer that for you. 3.18, there are several risks that have been identified as potential barriers to the successful implementation of the business plan, as noted below. Going on to 5.1, the EAS has a robust governance model. It is underpinned by the collaboration and members agreement. The EAS is funded on an annual basis from 3 sources, illustrated below. A detailed spending plan will accompany the final business plan, which is intrinsically linked to all actions contained within it. A detailed overview of the regional distribution of grants is shared with all stakeholders on a termly basis. 5.4. Over the past 3 financial years, the EAS has been able to contribute to the efficiency savings of councils. Councils are now paying less for school improvement than in 2012, and this year the EAS can honour its commitment to a 2% efficiency saving. So going to 6.1, high quality education is a fundamental prerequisite of ensuring future local and national prosperity through the provision of an informed and well-educated workforce and society. The local authority's statutory role to monitor and evaluate school performance and the quality of provision, coupled with its statutory powers of intervention in schools causing concern, is fundamental to ensuring all schools provide high quality education provision. So we have the consultees and background papers, which I understand that you have. So I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you very much indeed for introducing that. Who'd like to kick off questions or comments? Mr. Strong?
On 3.6, your list of consultees, I note you include pupils.
Yes.
Yeah. How is that done?
It's been done in a variety of ways. This year, we have Kath Bevan, who is the regional lead on wellbeing and equity. So she has gone into schools and worked with school councils. So she has had a PowerPoint. She's talked about the business plan in terms that the pupils will be able to understand, and they have responded, and their views then have fed into this.
And can you give us any sort of summary of the sort of responses you've got from pupils?
I think they have been mixed, but I can certainly go back to Kath Bevan and get a more detailed document for you if you'd like that.
Yeah. Would be interesting to know about that.
Yes,
I noticed
definitely.
also that while you've got pupils on your list, you don't seem to have staff on your list.
I'm happy to pick that up. We use our head teacher strategy group, and we have other forums where we talk to staff. They should be on the list. They have been consulted, so I will feed that back. That's no problem. Thank you.
So to clarify, staff should be on that list on 3.6?
They should be, yes.
Right. And how is that done?
Well, one of our main fora is through strategy groups, because we have a number of regional groups, and one of the key groups is the group that is head teachers. So they would share the business plan with their schools and with all the staff in their schools, and they also share it within their local authority associations. And the idea is that they feed that back to everyone who would be affected by the business plan. So within the consultation window, they have an opportunity to give a response to our managing director about their views.
Sorry, just come back. That does seem to be a bit of a flaw in the consultation process, but staff consultation seems to be virtually all done through head teachers, with all due respect to head teachers.
Okay, that's a point we can note. Councillor Watkins first.
Thank you. Just first one is just to understand the documentation question, first of all, which I now lost on my page. Come on, that one back up. Okay, on the LA specific annex, it talks about step 2 and step 3 in primary and secondary. What's the distinction between step 2 and step 3 for primary and secondary, please? First.
In the annex, step 2 and step 3, you're referring to the categorisation? I'm assuming. Yes. For step 2, we are looking at the school's capacity to improve. So when a challenge advisor works with teams and goes into school, they are looking at a range of evidence through the year, and they're looking then to see what is the school's capacity to improve, and that is graded then on the categorisation report between A and D, A being the least amount of support the school needs. And then when you get to the third step, step 3, that's the colour, that's the support that they will need. So green being the least amount of support, red being the highest amount of support. Okay?
Thank you.
All right.
I was thinking they were talking about two different ways of dividing up our primary schools and secondary schools, but then the figures didn't make any sense. But it's the same ones, but divided in a different way. Yeah. Gotcha. Yeah. Okay, that's fine. Great.
I was just going to say, Chair, step one, which used to be used, hence its absence, because categorisation has gone through an iteration of change and evolution. Step one was a pure data set in the past. Yeah. That's no longer used as part of the process for establishing the third part. So hence step 2 and 3, but not step 1.
Councillor Brown and then Councillor Thomas.
Thank you, Chair. I was looking at the local authority annex, which is the first document after the main report, and then there's tables there to do with primary and secondary. For example, on page 59 deals with primary, and then page 61 deals with secondary. And I just wondered if you could explain to me. I understand the the red, amber, yellow, and green mark categorisations, but I'm not quite sure of this A, B, C, D in the tables, and perhaps you could explain that. The other point I'd like to make is that it would be easier. I mean, I don't know if this is a draft report or if it's already published or what, but it would be easier if the lines on the table for Monmouthshire for 16 to 17 were then followed by the South East Wales figures, so it was easier to compare in relation to each age, because you're going sort of from one line to another to see a comparison. But I mean, I was a bit concerned about the comparison between Monmouthshire, both in primary and secondary, in relation to the schools that are in category in the green category, which is obviously the best category. So perhaps you could comment on that. I've got another question to do with Estin in general, if I could come back at a later stage on that. But there's sort of two questions. There's a few questions there already. The A, B, C, D category and what that means, and the green. Why Monmouthshire hasn't got as many schools in green category that we would be expecting in comparison with South East Wales, and it seems as if we're needing more support than you would really have expected in terms of our general GCSE results, and perhaps you could comment upon that particular aspect as well. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll take your last comment first in terms of the amount of schools in green. We've had a discussion, Will and I and Deb Hartfelt, in recent weeks about this, and schools do go through different periods of change. Sometimes schools may need a lot more support because of their individual circumstances, and we could go through every single school. We won't this morning, but there's a story behind each school in Monmouthshire and why at the moment they may need green support or why they may need yellow, amber or red, and we've had changes. If you compare from last year, we've had some primaries that have gone up from amber to yellow, where they need now less support. They've come out maybe of an Estin category. They don't need so much support, so they've gone from an amber to a yellow. We've also got some primaries that have gone from a yellow to a green. We've also had some that have gone from green to yellow and from green to amber, and that really reflects the current situation in that school. Sometimes it might be a change in leadership. It might be leadership is going through a particular period of change where they just need some additional support. That is reviewed. It doesn't mean to say it won't be reviewed for a year. We'll possibly be reviewing some of these in the summer, where the school may well have engaged really well with their challenge advisor and with the Learning Network schools so well that they don't need the level of support that we've put there originally, and we can reduce that within the year. We've had some really good stories this year as well, in that we've had Monmouth and King Henry going from yellow to green, 2 green secondary schools in the region. It's excellent. So they're in a position now where they are supporting other secondary schools in the region doing that really well. We've got 2 secondaries that are in amber. They need additional support at the moment. They're engaging well with leadership support, with extra support for their English, for their maths. It may be if their good work carries on, they will then go to that yellow. So there is an individual story behind each school and a reason why they are in that position, but you have got some really good success stories too. Go into the style of how this is presented. I will take that back to the Learning Intelligence team at the EAS to see if they can alter or possibly consider your recommendations with the style of how the data is presented. In terms of ABCD, this goes back to our discussion on the amount of support and the question earlier about leadership capacity. So if the leadership capacity is seen to be very good or excellent, they would be graded an A. And they're likely then to have a green categorisation because the leadership is so strong and they've built up capacity from the head to the deputy to their TLR holders. They've built up a strong capacity. If the head teacher goes off sick or anything happens, they've built up that capacity so well that they don't need support. So they would be green. So then go into B, yellow, you would normally have a correlation. Sometimes you may not, but if it's B, then the leadership capacity is still good, not quite as strong as the A. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Could I suggest if you are making alterations on the table in terms of, comparing the like 16-17 Monmouthshire, 16-17 South East Wales, if you are reordering the table like that, it would be helpful if the heading on the percentage of schools for the category A, B, C and D actually said leadership evaluation or something of that nature, and then we'd know what, I don't understand what A, B, C, D means without any actual key to it. Thank you.
Thank you. But in the next paper on categorisation, there will be a bit more of an explanation on all of that, which should make it a bit clearer.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Thomas and then Mr Fowler.
Thanks, Chair. I just wanted to raise a concern. I've got an interest here in the sense that I'm on the governing body of Ysgol Gymraeg Efenni. And it does concern me that they say their challenge advisor has been changing sort of constantly and there isn't a continuity there. And I feel in an authority like this, which is obviously a very anglicised authority, with only Ysgol y Ffin and Ysgol Gymraeg Efenni, that change is not good for the school in a sense, that discontinuity. And they are, in a sense, in a more difficult position. If they were in Ceredigion or in Carmarthen Authority, there would be far more Welsh medium schools than there are in this authority. So, is there anything you can actually do about that to get some continuity in terms of the challenge advisors for Ysgol Gymraeg Efenni and probably Ysgol y Ffin as well?
Thank you. I understand that. It is always difficult when there is a change. We have some schools where they request a change of challenge advisors. So, it can work both ways, but I understand when there is a break sometimes or a change, the continuity can be affected. I can certainly take that back to my line manager in the EAS. We'll make a comment on that. We do our best so that there is continuity, and as PCA overseer in Monmouthshire, I try and link closely with challenge advisors when there has been a change and with the schools to try and keep that continuity as best can. But certainly I'll take your comment back.
Can I just comment on that as well, Councillor, because it does relate partially to me and the role that I do. We try valiantly to find Welsh-speaking challenge advisors in this part of Wales. It is a tough job to find, to even have people apply for those roles. I'm a Welsh learner, did A-level many years ago, and I fulfil the role of challenge advisor with the patience and goodwill of a couple of Welsh-speaking, Welsh medium schools in the region with their goodwill to help me to use as much Welsh as I can because they want to have a challenge advisor and have continuity. Absolutely take your point. We are always looking for new challenge advisors and we are always looking for Welsh-speaking challenge advisors in the EAS.
Yeah, I take your point, but in reality, in reality, you need somebody who is very competent in the language. And with no disrespect, when you're learning a language, I mean, I could go into a French school today, and yes, I could speak a little bit of French, but it wouldn't do them a great deal of good. You need somebody who's competent in the language. And I think, and unfortunately, I think sometimes we pass that over and say, well, recruitment is difficult. We'll just have to make do. But, you know, for those children in Ysgol Gymraeg Efenni and Ysgol y Ffin, I've had children there, and I know Councillor Jones has it in the past. You obviously want the same for them as in any English medium school. And I think that is a bit of a difficulty for us as an authority. And I'm not in the playing your... the challenges that you have in recruitment. It is difficult in this part of the world, but I think it's something we need to address more sort of strongly in terms of those children, you know, in those schools.
Okay, point well made. Mr Fowler and then Councillor Watkins.
Thank you. 2 points. The first is more technicality, as this is a set of public papers that we've been issued. There seems to be 2 LA annexes, and the first one, with a personal interest, declares that Raglan School's still in Eston monitoring, and it quite clearly isn't. And then in the second version of the LA annex, it says it isn't. So, as it's public papers, I just
yes, you're quite right. You're quite right. And I was given the papers, and they had been sent on. I will take that back, and Hayley and I have addressed this. There were some errors in the Learning Intelligence team. We have addressed it. As soon as I noted it, I sent an additional document in, but I have raised it with the head of Learning Intelligence in EAS already, because you're absolutely right. It has to be accurate.
Lino Gwent as well.
Absolutely. So thank you for raising it.
But onto my main point, though, that was just an aside for clarification. Looking at the Monmouthshire strategic priorities, our first one there is to improve outcomes of vulnerable groups, including FSM learners, particularly at Key Stage 4. I'm very aware that us in Monmouthshire here, we're the lowest funded council in Wales, and that's council-wide. Then equally in schools, we face a similar picture, because we do not have great levels of FSM. We only have 10%, as opposed to all our other neighbours that are near on double that and exceed double that in some cases. So our schools don't get large amounts of PDG grant money, and I just wonder how the EAS is going to tackle that specifically in Monmouthshire, given the very different environment that our schools don't have the money for these initiatives to support the FSM. I just wonder what the different thinking is that the EAS are going to bring to Monmouthshire to make it tailored and specific, that we will see an improvement in those outcomes.
Yes, thank you. You're absolutely right. And it's on a lot of agendas at the moment in the EAS, as it is in Monmouthshire as well. One thing we have been doing this year is partnering schools with schools outside of the region. So schools in Penarth, in Cardiff, where they are in similar socio-economic areas as your schools, but actually they're doing very well. They're doing some very good things, some new innovative thinking with their work with FSM. And that's going on at the moment. So hopefully in the next scrutiny, I could report back to you on that. But we are linking those schools. I know that Monmouth, King Henry, comprehensives have been linking with these schools then to see what they're actually doing. And that feeds into the peer working work that Hayley is liaising with Mick Waters on, because that's obviously a big priority. And we've got visits to schools coming up now in March, where the schools will be visiting each other and seeing the types of things that they're doing. Sometimes it's just going and visiting and thinking, well, I haven't actually tried that. Let's try it. It's worked here. And I think it'll be an exciting few months now to see the results of these visits.
So we have the Bishop of Llandaff School and also Stanwell School, both from the Central South Consortium, Cardiff schools, and they're working closely with schools. I think we've got 6 from our region who are engaging with them on. We have a similar context, we have a similar free school meals sort of profile, if you like. There are similarities in terms of what our expectations would be of our learners. We're expecting very great things of them, and let's really bring that bar up. Come and look at what we're doing, we'll come and look at what you're doing. How are the vulnerable learners who are in the minority within many of our schools of that nature. How are they being accommodated, and how are you planning for them, really to close that achievement gap where poverty or any form of deprivation is impacting? So Professor McWaters is working really closely. We've developed 6 models altogether of peer work, and one of them is those, if you like, more high achieving schools and accommodating their learners from their more able to their less able to various levels of affluence and deprivation. We're excited about that. It's new, it's fresh out of the box, but I'm sure that Helen or myself, if you'd like me to, will come and report to you on the outcomes of that piece of work. Thank you.
Councillor Brown.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, just following on from what you've, the questions that have been asked and what you've just been talking about. I mean, obviously, you know, within the Gwent area, you know, if there is peer review or whatever, you know, you might be in a situation where a head has a lot more available resources to go for innovative means in improving things, you know, because of the pupil support grant, because of more SMM pupils. So although I can see that, you know, presumably, are you talking about pairing with similar schools outside of Gwent because of that particular resource implication?
That is the project, Councillor. Yeah,
yeah,
similar schools. Yes.
Yeah, because otherwise it's unfair when schools have got extra resources that they can put in to deal with particular issues, and you know, I can see that particular point. The other question I've got is on pupils with FSM. Do you actually monitor how schools actually spend this extra premium and how they're using it? Because I noticed once I read about an English school, and what they were doing was that they were providing those pupils with things like you know, these sort of GCSE handbooks and things like that you can get from Smiths, which in a sense, you know, if you've the sort of parents with more resources may be able to buy for their pupils, but you know, those with limited resources might not be able to. And I wondered whether there were similar schemes here.
Yes, we do. Thank you. We do monitor it very closely, and that's part of the work of the Challenge Advisor, and we're actually doing that at the moment. We are going into schools, expecting the schools to have completed a mid-year evaluation on the impact of their spend, and that'll be a conversation then with the Challenge Advisor, the head teacher. It may be with the deputy head teacher, or if they've got a wellbeing lead in the school, which they should have, to ask about how all these interventions are going. So they will have already planned out what they're going to do, how they're going to use their grant, and then account for it, because that is part of the work then. And the Challenge Advisor will look to see what it's been spent on, and is it making a difference? You can spend a lot of money on buying things, but actually, is it having an impact on the learners, particularly the vulnerable learners? And it may be that it benefits some of the other learners, but the main thing has to be it benefits the vulnerable learners, particularly those in receipt of free school meals. And so we carefully monitor that. We look at the reports that the head teachers have written, and we'll challenge the heads as well on that. Is it making a difference? So it's very carefully monitored. We're also holding grant workshops today, tomorrow, and just after half term that I'll be attending, and so will Hayley, to support the schools in planning for the next financial year, so that they are looking at the best practice, the Sutton Toolkit, where things have worked really well, and that they are looking carefully at the monies that they have and planning them in the best way for their vulnerable learners. There's a lot of monitoring.
Okay. Mr. Fowler.
Looking at the business plan as a whole, it's fascinating to read what the other local authorities have set as their priorities as well as ourselves. And there's a very common theme across all 5 local authorities that Key Stage 4 keeps popping up. Key Stage 4, Key Stage 4, Key Stage 4. And there's a very strong theme of that running through. My query is that, are we chasing Key Stage 4 because that's now the only published data sets that we do? Or is it to address a need that there's been some kind of lesser provision historically for Key Stage 4 that everyone's now asking for more Key Stage 4 intervention from the EAS?
Certainly there is a focus on making sure that by the time the pupils leave, the learners leave at 16, that we're giving them the best that they can and that they leave school with having achieved their full potential. And across the region, we have schools at the moment, some secondary schools, where the outcomes aren't as we would have hoped. And so all 5 authorities have work in some of their secondaries, not all. As we know here, we've got some highly performing secondary schools as well. So that is a focus because that age is so important, so integral when they leave school. Key Stage 3 has been a big focus, so your comment there. Key Stage 3, there has to be momentum, there has to be very good teaching and learning, and we do know that we have so many pupils who leave primary school in year 6 with a very high level. Sometimes we see a little dip in Key Stage 3, so there has been a lot of work with advisors and school-to-school work to make sure that it's not suddenly a rush at Key Stage 4, but that work, the work that's been going on in Key Stage 2 is developed when the learners arrive at secondary school in year 7, 8 and 9, and that gains momentum too. And there's a lot of work going on for that too.
Can I take a reassurance then that this business plan isn't coming at a cost to the rest of primary education and everything else, that there is more of a concentration on Key Stage 4?
I can guarantee that, yes.
My apologies to Councillor Watkins. She's been waiting some time to come in. Your moment has arrived.
Thank you so much. And tragically, it's also about exclusions. I recognise it hasn't got an asterisk, so it might be that it's more directed towards our Chief Officer. But I note with some disturbance that there's been a large increase in exclusions of 5 days or fewer at primary and secondary level, or that there were a decrease of 6 days or more. I was just wondering, can you comment on actually what's happening in that setting? Can you give some more comment, please?
I think, first thing to say, I think it'd be really good for committee to receive the detail on those. So some of the other metrics will sit behind that is in the number of instances and number of pupils who are involved in those instances, and we can disaggregate it to a significant extent. It has been the case that when we were inspected back in 2012-13, we did have very high levels of fixed-term exclusions. We then worked very hard to reduce them. But I think there has been significant pressure on the schools. I think we're seeing changes in patterns of behaviour in school, and we're seeing an increase in the way that that's being managed through the use of fixed-term exclusions. That is why we're doing the additional learning needs review and trying to make sure that we have a really effective and graduated response to behaviour challenges in the classroom. So one of the things which we've already accepted as part, and Cabinet have accepted as part of the additional learning needs review, was the establishment of inclusion units in each school. So that's an additional teacher, an additional TA, and someone to support EOTUS work in the schools to make sure that we're actually able to keep children in school rather than them being excluded. That's really important. But, you know, I have to say, even since I started in this role, the number of times that I get contacted about challenging behaviour and head teachers making very difficult decisions has increased, certainly. So I think there is a pattern there, and that's one of the reasons we are looking at it as a key part of our work. It will continue to be a focus until we are confident that we're not just not excluding people because we think it's a bad metric, but we actually have a systemic approach to actually ensuring that they don't need to.
Councillor John.
Thank you very much. I just wanted Thank you. I just wanted to pick up on a couple of points that members have made, particularly with reference to outcomes for children who are eligible for free school meals, and picking up on the point that Mr Fowler made a moment ago. We consistently have some of Wales's best outcomes for children who are eligible for free school meals at foundation phase and Key Stage 2, but we recognise that outcomes at Key Stage 4 are not where they should be. Now, we recognise that of all the local authorities in Wales, we probably have the biggest gap in terms of retention on that transition to secondary school. Most of the county's towns are right on our borders, and most authorities in Wales will keep the vast majority of their students from primary to secondary school. We actually export and import a lot of children, so those cohorts are not quite the same, but that's not the full picture. So that's partly why, together with our partners in the EAS, we commissioned this piece of work from Professor David Egan, looking at the nature of poverty in rural communities and the impact that has on education standards. You're absolutely right, Mr. Fowler, about the funding issues. On top of being the lowest funded local authority in the country, we've also had the deepest cut this year. But I also feel we don't get a fair share of education improvement grant or pupil development grant. So while we're one of 22 authorities, and I appreciate we're not one of the largest, but we get about 2% of Wales's education improvement grant, and we get about 1.3% of Wales's pupil development grant. And I think there are also concerns about the Welsh Government formula in terms of the way that that's distributed to schools.
Councillor John, I hate to stop a cabinet member in full flow, but I think we're straying into an area that is more concerned with the Welsh Government than with EAS.
Sure.
So if you could keep your comments
Sure.
addressing EAS and this report, please.
Sure, no problem. If I can just go back to the free school meals and the specific issue about performance at Key Stage 4. In recent days, we've been in talks with our 4 head teachers at secondary schools in Monmouthshire about if there's any additional support that we can offer to pupils in Year 11 to help them achieve the very best they can in the summer. So we're proposing to make £75,000 available. That'll be £1,000 per pupil who is eligible for free school meals in Year 11 in our 4 secondary schools to provide whatever support they may need, and that will be up to each school to decide in terms whether that support takes the form of additional one-to-one or small group tuition, whether it's holiday revision sessions or support in terms of additional learning resources. We're making that money available to schools, and hopefully, obviously there'll be an evaluative process that will follow, but we would hope that that may offer some support to our most vulnerable learners in Year 11 this year.
Ms Wakeley.
Thank you. I just wanted to, in the actual business plan, I just wanted to ask a question really about the new professional standards. And it mentions a difference, a national approach and a regional model. And I just wanted to understand the difference between the two and how the two sort of interlink.
Yes, thank you. I mean, this is something that we hope we've captured quite well in the business plan. Nationally, the Welsh Government see the development of leadership in Wales at 3 levels, really. We've got national government, and then the middle tier, if you like, which is, I guess, all of us in the room, and then at school level. So what we've done as an EAS is put together a programme that is, if you like, a mixed menu, I suppose you could call it that, where we have less emphasis now in professional learning around leadership on central training, if you like, although there is still some central training, but we've got more emphasis now on learning network schools, if you like. That's the phrase, capital L, capital N, capital S, which is a status that a school would gain through a robust quality assurance programme where we would identify strengths within a school and then make a decision as to whether that school was well placed to share across the region. So we have a series of learning network schools, and this is, I suppose, our key difference this year. We haven't ceased central training, but what we're trying to do now is blend the way in which those new professional standards are, if you like, bled out into the profession, understood, utilised and used as part of school leadership systems, because it isn't just about professional development council. This is also about accountability, performance management. So heads right now are all grappling with the same challenges around ensuring that the new professional standards for teaching and for leadership are, if you like, becoming embedded into the way that schools work. It's our role as a regional service to ensure that where we work with Welsh Government. I'll work with the National Academy for leadership in schools, for developing leadership, our own professional learning programmes, our own challenge advisors, our learning network schools, that we have a joined up approach in using those professional standards. And the way we're doing that is to put them everywhere. So they're in every training programme, they're in every governance programme. We're just getting them out by stealth over time into the system, if that makes sense.
Can I just quickly come back? The sort of additional question again on professional development and professional standards is there's a comment here about how you're going to quality assure and a longitudinal impact model for professional learning. How does that work? What's the data that you're going to be collecting, and how are you going to be measuring and reporting? It sounds quite complex and.
So what we do, every year the EAS commissions higher education institutes to, if you like, evaluate, review the impact of the whole range of our work. So last year, for example, we had a major study looking at the impact of cluster work. That was just one of the examples. We've had Professor Mick Waters come into our region, do some work around impact of well, really the whole service and how challenge advisors in particular work with schools and the impact of that. So what we mean by a longitudinal study is that we would commission in one of our partners. So we've worked with Trinity St David's, for example, as one of our partners, and we would commission that. They would do the study, and then they would report that into all of our governance structures, first of all to us, and then to all committees, all governance structures across our range of stakeholders, so that everyone gets the key messages around what's worked well and what needs to be better. An external validation. So that wouldn't be done by us, that would be externally commissioned. Thanks.
Okay, Councillor Brown.
Yes, thank you. I think one of the difficulties for Monmouthshire, in a sense, is that you know, the sort of pockets of deprivation, and in a sense the pupils that are in free school meals, in a sense, have a double disadvantage because they don't have the accumulation of funds that other schools that have larger FSM pupils do. And I just wondered whether the EAS, when they were looking at sort of good practice across Gwent in dealing with trying to improve standards for SM pupils, would consider recommending the idea of sort of like a central fund, you know, in other words, that could help with resources, where if you'd seen a good practice elsewhere in Gwent that was doing better, but because they had the extra resources for innovative means, whether, you know, that would help alleviate the issue with regard to what I consider to be you know, double disadvantage because of these pockets of deprivation. And when I was a councillor in another authority, I had a ward which was very mixed, you know, in terms of I had pockets of deprivation, but I also had sort of like mansion-style houses, you know, from one extreme to the other. And I did find that there was some difficulty in, you know, getting funds for these areas of pockets of deprivation, you know, even on lottery grants and things like that, because they didn't come within the overall, you know, they didn't hit whatever deprivation target it was. And I just wondered whether it was something that was worth discussing with Welsh Government, whether there would be a facility where you'd seen some really good practice elsewhere that would help, you know, schools in areas where where they've got less resources.
I mean, in terms of funding, that really is Welsh Government and the more seniors in the EAS. But in terms of sharing practice, the comments that you mentioned there, that is certainly going on. And I know that Kath Bevan, who's head of the wellbeing in the EAS, has put together a menu in a package of where best practice is for schools to be able to look, because sometimes there are schools that may be not in receipt of an awful lot of free school meal funding, but actually doing some very good work there. It's not always about the amount of money, it's what you do with it. And there's some very, very effective strategies that are being used. So out of the 250 schools in the region, I know Kath has good knowledge of where that practice is very good, where schools are in receipt of maybe a lot, or where they're in receipt of not much, but what they're actually doing is making a big impact. So she certainly shares that, and we know we can have access to that when we go into schools. We can be signposting heads to go and visit other schools for that sharing.
From the chair, I'd just like to comment that I think EAS has a very good understanding of where expertise is found in schools now, and it's one of the strengths of the service. And certainly the comment that Councillor Brown made about pockets of poverty. Certainly the primary school in my own ward has recently been categorised as yellow. There is excellent practice going on, and I'd like to publicly congratulate the staff and leadership at Derryview Primary in Abergavenny, where a recent survey suggested that 42% of the children are below the poverty line. And EAS know about the good practice there and use the good practice there. And I think that really brings home to good effect the point that I think you were trying to raise, Councillor Brown. So thanks for that. I think we've given this a really good conversation this morning. And to sum it up, I think we've raised 1 or 2 points for EAS in terms of presentation. On the other hand, I think that we can look at our discussion and say that we as a county have identified our priorities. We've given free school meals, youngsters, we've given the numbers of exclusions a real good go this morning. We've talked about performance at Key Stage 4. So I think that what this business plan represents is a very good attempt by EAS to capture the concerns of Monmouthshire as a local authority and to set out how they will be addressed. We have 2 recommendations. I think they could perhaps best be summed up in asking for your approval for simply that we accept this report. We think that it captures the needs of Monmouthshire and sets out effectively how they will be addressed in collaboration with our own professionals within the county. Could I see a show of hands for supporting that recommendation? I think that's unanimous. Thank you both very much for that presentation, but of course, don't move your seats because we now move on to the next agenda item, which is agenda item 7, which is the school categorisation report.
Thank you, Chair. So, National School Categorisation. The Minister for Education and Skills announced the introduction of the National School Categorisation System in September 2014. The system, which covers both primary and secondary schools, has evolved over subsequent years. So I would just pull out the main points from the report. The process is outlined. As we've talked about already, step 1, there's no standards group published for 2018-19. Step 2, the outcome is a judgment about a school's improvement capacity, A to D. Step 3 leads to a support category for each school, either green, yellow, amber, red. There's an outline there of performance of EFSM, new and amalgamated schools, and changes to a school's support category in year. The process is carried out on an annual basis. The outcomes communicated to Welsh Government each year for publication. However, it is possible for each region to review a school's categorisation at any point during the year in response to change in circumstances. Okay, moving on to schools in inspection follow-up. the national school categorisation system is not contingent on the outcomes of an individual school's inspection. Where school self-evaluation and monitoring of schools' performance are effective, this should result in appropriate action that will support a school's self-improvement and avoid the need for inspection follow-up activity. However, where a school requires follow-up as a result of inspection, the associated degree of risk, the need to provide evidence of a school's progress against its recommendations is weighed carefully when determining a judgment about a school's improvement capacity and making a decision about its support category. So there's some sections there then on schools requiring SI or special measures or ESTIN review. So moving on to step 2, self-evaluation and capacity to self-improve in relationship to leadership and teaching and learning. And this consists of a judgment, A to D, based on the school's capacity to self-improve. Schools where the judgment is A show the greatest capacity to improve, along with ability then to support other schools. Those where the judgment is D require the most support. Moving on to the second paragraph in that section, the judgment indicates the degree of confidence in the school's capacity to drive forward its own improvement. Moving on to step 3, the categorisation and level of support, challenge and intervention. So the outcomes will be combined to determine the school support category, step 3 of the process, and the final categorisation is based on a colour coding system. This is discussed with the school and agreed with the LA. The colour indicates the level of support a school requires: green, yellow, amber or red. And it's detailed there how much time each school will get depending on what colour it is. Peer review we've already touched on this morning, and in 2018-19 all schools across the region were offered the opportunity to participate in a peer review process. Previously this had been open to green schools. This year it was great that we had some amber schools asking to be part of the process, and a red school too. So they joined in, collaborated and worked closely with other schools, and I think the general feedback has been that schools found it a positive experience in that they'd worked with other peers, and those networks on the whole are continuing. There is then a section on the regional standardisation and moderation process, the national verification process, and then we go into the actual categories. We have the primary school categories, 2018-19. No national average is readily available for step 1 and step 2 data, and no step 1 data used for categorisation. The chart shows that during the past 3 years, the proportion of primary schools in the green category has increased for step 2 and is now 43%. So you have a chart there, and we've talked already about this with the improvement capacity either A, B, C or D, and then the colours related to that. Moving on to step 3, the proportion of schools in the green category, primary schools, is below the regional average and in line with the national, and the proportion in the red is in line with the regional and above the national. Okay, moving on to secondary school categories, 2018-19. The chart below shows during the past 3 years, the proportion of schools in the green category has increased for step 2. As there are only 4 secondary schools in Monmouthshire, this increase relates to 2 schools. And then for step 3, there are 2 secondary schools in the green category, no schools in the red category, and 2 schools are amber. So I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, any questions? Yes, Councillor Brown.
Yes, thank you. I mean, my understanding is in a sense the way this has changed was following Professor Donaldson's review of ESTIN and how they looked at schools. Is that right or not? Sorry, could I just carry on first? Because one of the things that he was arguing in his paper was about improvement of schools instead of comparison with schools, which was really about improvement standards as opposed to outcomes. Now, the only concern I had about that particular issue is, from a parent perspective, obviously, it's nice to have a categorisation of, how well a school is doing, rather than a a self-evaluation improvement scheme. And if a school is doing terribly well and they're in category A, in a sense, you know, how can they self-improve if they're the top of the chart, as it were? So isn't outcome and self-improvement linked in some shape or form in any event? I'm not happy about no national averages or anything like that, because again, I think it could lead to standards slipping. And the other thing that Professor Donaldson recommended was that on the PISA charts, that these were only, you know, international literacy and reading, that these were only measured once every 3 years rather than annually.
Councillor Brown, sorry to interrupt. I think that this is going largely again into Welsh Government territories about the way they see the future of education in Wales, rather than an EAS matter of how they can implement education locally. Have you got a question that you could just address purely to Monmouthshire?
Well, I think in a sense, I mean, I'm just trying to work out basically, and perhaps I could have an answer to this, whether or not the business of improvement and outcomes, whether that's where it stems from and why these changes are being made, or if this was the same as before. Thank you.
I can answer. Thank you, Chair. Thank you. In terms of the first point that you made about Professor Donaldson, you're quite right. There was a review. There's been a review of ESTIN 2. This is the last year that you'll see categorisation like this, in this form. And so categorisation that started in 2014 in this form, it's carried on. It's the same this year. There are a lot of different meetings, all sorts of things going on at the moment to develop the new National Self-Evaluation Toolkit. You will have seen announcements possibly in the news this week too. There is a model, a new school improvement evaluation model that's being developed, an authentication model which is being developed, and we're in the process at the moment of working with some of Welsh Government and reviewing this. So it will look different, and we know next year it won't be published in the way it is published now, with colours for parents and all of that. But what we do know is that the right amount of support for schools will be given. So it will look different to this. But we will be working closely with schools and with directors so that we come to an agreement on how much support a school will need. So where there is strong capacity to self-improve, there will be limited amount of support needed. Conversely then, where there are, for example, the equivalent of a RED, now we will make sure that the appropriate support is given. But all of this, some things have been published, but not all yet in terms of the new authentication model.
Okay, thank you.
So it was a relevant question, Chair, and I think, you know, I am a bit concerned about the way you're restricting conversation, because, you know, in the first report you mentioned about how you were going to write to the Welsh Government and, you know, in relation to a particular issue, but when we raise issues to do with you know, potential representation on changes, we're actually curtailed. So I'd like a little bit more flexibility, please, Chair. Thank you.
I take your point, Councillor. I would point out that the letter that I have agreed to write to the Minister is about specifically a Monmouthshire service, and it will be written within that context. Can we move on? Yeah, Councillor, my Vice Chair, Councillor Brown.
Jones. Always Brown. He does it every time.
One day I will get the name of my Vice Chair correct.
Martin, thank you for the promotion there.
No, it's absolutely fine. Just wanted to say congratulations on what you're doing. It all looks very positive now from what we're seeing on these papers. Latest categorisation now shows Monmouthshire having more green schools than ever before, including Kimmenview in my area of Wisham, and my old school of Usk. So, and obviously now the 2 secondary schools for the first time, which is fabulous. A third of all the green schools I see are in South East Wales as well, in South East Wales are from Monmouthshire, which is also really encouraging. I recognise all the work you're doing, looking after all the different colour schools, but in terms of it's good to see that the red schools, we've gone down to 2 to 1, but what are the prospects for the remaining red school? Thanks.
Thank you. And thank you for recognising the improvements there. I don't think I can talk in detail about the school in terms of confidentiality, obviously. What I can say is that substantial amounts of support are going into the school, and this year, as well as Challenge Advisor support, we have learning network support going in from an excellent school in Newport. And so we're trying different things this year to complement the Challenge Advisor work. We've also got a foundation phase team going in from the EAS, and we're working closely with Will, the director, on a range of different types of support.
Thank you, Councillor Jones, for that comment. Are there any other questions or comments? Well, again, if I could thank you both for that presentation. I think all we need to do at this point is to note its comments and conclusions. Thank you both very much indeed for your time. If we could move on then to item 8, the Play Action Plan and the Play Sufficiency Assessment. Members of committee will remember we had a presentation on this, was it in January? And from that, I was asked to write to the Welsh Government on behalf of Monmouthshire to make the point that play is so important that a system that really sees how much is left in the pot at the end of the year, and there you are, you can have that towards play, really isn't good enough and does a disservice to our young children. This, I think, is taken that on in terms of the statutory duty to conclude an assessment. And I noticed that Mr. Moran strides purposefully into the room just at the right moment to take this item forward. And also another colleague, I'm sorry, you were here before, and my apologies. But thank you both, you're very welcome. And we would now like to hear about where we are in taking this forward. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Chair. As I say, Matthew Lewis, Green Infrastructure and Countryside Manager. I'm going to just briefly introduce the report, and then we'll welcome your views. So this is the report that came back as a result of our, we promised to come back as a result of our report to you on the 29th of November, to update you on progress on the play sufficiency assessment and the preparation of the play action plan. I was going to skip most of the background as it's the same as was in the previous report that you'd had, so I'm sure you've already taken that on board. And I was going to go down to 3.8, and just a reminder, I think again you've seen this before, that the play sufficiency assessment is quite set out in quite a specified way in the measure. There's 102 criteria against those matters A to I, so we're currently working our way through the criteria, so we haven't, we're not bringing to you today the red, amber, green rating on that. What I've done, though, further on is sort of summarised where we know the main areas of progress and the areas which we still need to progress. What I was hoping perhaps could be the focus of the main focus of the discussion was the sort of strategic approach in terms of the play action plan that has to accompany the play sufficiency assessment, because in a way that's the forward-looking element of the strategic element of the document. As I summarised in 3.9, and I think we talked about before, we took the view in 2016 to reduce the number of actions down to a limited number of strategic actions. That seemed to more fit with the wider partnership approach, and has proved to be quite a sound way of working. So at the moment, subject to anything that comes up through discussions and consultations in the next month, our proposal is to keep to the core actions that we set out in 2016. As I say, we'll test that as we carry on with the consultation process. So I've set out in 3.5 those core actions. I won't repeat them in detail. We talked about some of these previous meeting. Under space for play, the further actions that we think we need to identify in the play action plan going forward are continuing to review fixed play provision. We're just literally about to commission somebody to do a play value assessment of all of the, not all, many of the fixed play provision in the county, which would be a first, because strangely, although it's been provided, it's never really been assessed in terms of its actual value to children as for play. We want to carry on in terms of looking at the pilot around potentially rationalising fixed play provision in some areas, and particularly in Monmouth as a starter. And then starting to address some of the issues that were identified in the Bulwark and Thornwell play research, which again we've talked about previously, including the use of school grounds and extending that approach to other communities. So that's in terms of space for play. In terms of supervised provision, we've obviously, we talked again about that quite considerably last time. In terms of going forward, the key issues are really to continue to build on the community open access play model, to look to develop the food and fun aspect through the school holiday enrichment programme, bilingual play schemes, and then potentially in the longer term to look towards wider community provision across other communities and provision beyond the summer holidays. Obviously that is entirely dependent on building new partnerships and funding streams. In terms of providing for diverse need, we still think that's a priority, and the future actions are really just to carry on in terms of developing that wraparound provision for children with more complex needs in particular, and to continue to provide inclusive play opportunities. Part of the assessment of fixed play areas will also look at the assess the inclusivity or not of existing fixed play areas. So that's something that we can potentially build on in the future as well. The last two are sort of more background actions in terms of continuing with the play strategy group, which now forms part of the Creating an Active and Healthy Monmouthshire Partnership. And then really picking up the area that perhaps has been the most challenging in a sense, is getting better detailed knowledge around what the actual issues are in communities. So the proposed focus for that is to roll out that school-based, child-led approach to identifying play requirements in communities. And we've lucky enough to get some the usual very late play opportunity grant, which has just been delivered to us to, I think we had the offer letter on Friday, didn't we, Mike? To deliver by the end of the financial year, and we're going to use some of that in order to build a toolkit so that that approach is and that's been we're going out to commission that through Jude Langdon in the partnership team, so that can be used in the future. So, as I say, our broad proposal at this stage is to keep with the key action areas and then look to develop those. So I think really from this meeting what we were hoping to get out of it was whether you felt as members that was the right approach, and whether you thought there were any key areas that we either, I guess, shouldn't be doing, or key areas that we should be doing that we've not identified. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed. Mr. Moran, anything from you at this point, or? Oh, okay, I shall now pause and engage my brain and then ask Councillor Jones to make a comment.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for all that you're doing on this. I know that there's no specific person that's specifically looking and paid for to look at play provision, which is unfortunate. I think we have an important role to play in this county to provide play areas and play facilities for our children and ensure that we are not facilities deprived, and our children of Monmouthshire have the same opportunities and access to facilities as those across the border in South East Wales. I think that we all know we don't have the best weather here in Wales, in the UK, and therefore we need to take that into account. And I don't believe, having evaluated myself, looking at the sports provisions in Monmouthshire, that we have the right amount of all-weather facilities, particularly looking at 3G, 4G pitches. Central Monmouthshire being particularly deprived in this regard, and therefore our children are being deprived every time that the weather is bad, be it frost or rain, and all the sports provision, be it football, rugby or whatever, has to shut down. And weeks and weeks on end, they're missing out on playing. Therefore, I propose that we maybe look at this. I'm really, really encouraged to hear that you're going to do more work on looking at fixed play provision. But if you could particularly look at all weather facilities, outdoor weather facilities, that'd be great. I understand there's a severe lack of money in the budget, but there are partners involved that would come in on projects like that. I was looking at one myself. So be it WIU or education facility, like the Coleg Gwent, etc. We could work in partnership again. So if we could look at that, I'd appreciate it a lot, because I do feel that we might be an affluent county to many, but in terms of our play facilities, for children in particular, which we're looking to combat childhood obesity and well-being and things, then we need to look at this and as a priority. Thank you.
Perhaps if I could just make a couple of comments on that. We are actually trying to set up a meeting with the what's called the collaboration group that looks after the funding for outdoor pitches in Wales. And we're doing that in the context of the proposals for the new school in Abergavenny. So that meeting should be taking place within the next couple of months, I think, and we'll obviously raise the issues that you just raised at that meeting. And the other thing is that going on the success to date of the new indoor play provision at Monmouth Leisure Centre, we are obviously looking at that in some of our other sites. And I think there's a meeting on site today in Caldicot looking at how that site could potentially be remodelled to provide some indoor play facilities as well in Caldicot. It's not very easy because some of the buildings are quite old, dating back to the early 1970s, but we are looking at it to see what sort of indoor provision we can make there. And I think if we started, again, realistically in Monmouthshire, if we started with the 4 leisure centre sites, that might be a decent start on identifying those indoor provisions maybe.
Yeah, I welcome what you said, Mr. Moran, that's great. But I'm concerned with the more rural areas and the areas that don't have leisure centres, for example, Usk, and them missing out, and children having to obviously then having to get a transport to other places far away, and obviously our transport facilities aren't the best. So we really need facilities on our doorstep where possible. Thank you.
I think all you can do is no to that request and look for the money at some future point. Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm not actually going to ask a question. I'm just going to make a comment. I want to congratulate everybody involved with the holiday facilities at all our centres. I know it's difficult for the ones in the country to get in, but particularly Paul Sullivan. I have great praise for them. I go up to the leisure centre and there's so many children there taking advantage during out the holidays, and they actually run right up at Christmas Eve as well, so that the parents are blessed in 2 ways. They've got happy children because they're going up there and doing all sorts of different activities, and also it gives them time to go and shop then. But it is a wonderful facility, and I know it's increased this last year, hasn't it? There's a lot more going there, and I know we've got a long way to go. We need more areas for play, as Laura said, particularly indoor if possible. But I do want to give credit where credit's due, and I go up there quite often and see them really enjoying themselves, and I know it's the same in all the other leisure centres, and I congratulate Monmouthshire County Council on this.
Certainly, I think the immediate success of Monmouth is a great payback for the resources that the county has put into it. Councillor Brown.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think I recall when you looked at this item before. I think, obviously, I'd like to congratulate you as well in terms of the, the way you deal with these things in relation to the resources available. But I understood that at last time you were looking at the Piggy Hill or something in Chepstow, where there was some proposed work on improvement there. And also I did express last time about the concern about obviously the town and community councils are ones that fund these things, and I think in Chepstow it's used to be in Chepstow Leisure Centre and has now changed to Bulwark. And I did ask then about the possibility of seeing whether not being in less of a central area, whether this actually resulted in fewer children being aware of the play schemes going on and the opportunities for them. So just wondered if that's something that you'd looked at in the meantime, because I can remember it was raised last time, and obviously you're looking at Monmouth and so forth, but often Chepstow feels a bit like the poor relation in terms of schemes that are being developed either for town regeneration or anything else. And I'd just like to put in a plug for our particular area as well. Thank you.
Sorry, Mike can probably come back on the Piggy Hill. I think in terms of the leisure centre community, open access community play, what's happened since we started if you like, shifted the play out of the leisure centres, replaced that with the Monmouthshire Games in the leisure centre, and then have the community open access play in addition, that in total, over the last 3 years, we've seen quite considerable growth in the number of children that are involved. So I think we are getting the best of both worlds there, in a sense, in that we're getting the Monmouthshire Games, which is the more commercial product, which then enables that to run over the wider holidays, as Councillor Powell has mentioned, but then also getting increasing quite some variation between venues. I mean, I think what we've learned over the last 3 years, that the selection of the venue, the community venue, is actually quite critical as well. Some venues have worked better than others, but that's a learning process by just trying it out and seeing what happens. But Mike would have the sort of finger on the more detailed figures, but the general trend has been quite a successful one.
I think we've colleagues have spoken to the town council in Chepstow. I'm not quite sure if it has actually come before town council members, but they were specifically talking about improvements to facilities at Piggy's Hill. So I think if it hasn't gone to the town council already, it will be doing in the next few weeks. And as Matthew has said, the selection of venues is quite often a critical factor. And what we've noticed in Chepstow, and some of this is supposition rather than fact, is that the main road through the town and the distance between Bulwark and Thornwell and the leisure centre is quite a difficult one to breach. So we've been offering, in partnership with the town council, some potential free places at the Monmouthshire Games, which is a paid scheme for children in receipt of free school meals. But it's very difficult to get those children to travel to the leisure centre because of the distance involved. So the initiative we're trying to look at this year is possibly lengthening the session in Bulwark and Thornwell, and possibly including a food element in there for children who are attending the open access play sessions. And experience elsewhere has shown that you do get an increase in numbers when those sorts of things happen as an add-on to the basic play provision. So instead of it being a 2-hour provision, it could turn into a 3.5-hour provision with breakfast and and lunch provided. And we're looking to access Welsh Government funding to do that this coming summer.
Councillor Brown?
Yeah, I think that would be great, you know, because I did see a recent TV programme in one area where they were doing that sort of thing, and you know, obviously during the time out of term time when free school meal pupils can't get their free school meal at school, you know, obviously you don't want to see children going hungry, you know, so, and I think when they did it, it actually increased the number of children actually attending as a result. But also, you know, obviously you don't want to see children go hungry. Well, I certainly don't anyway.
Councillor Woodhouse.
Thank you, Chair. A lot of what I was going to say has already been said, but I would like to offer my support to everything that you're doing. There's so much good work in here. It's difficult to pick out things to actually say, you know, concentrate on that. The actual invitations we get regularly, and I know I met the chairman there, to the Monmouthshire Games, I would, you know, recommend that to all councillors when that invitation comes out. Go along, see what's happening. It is fantastic to see those young people involved. It's also very, can I congratulate the town and community councils that get involved in sponsoring that, because that's very important. And, you know, they do play a large part in that.
Have you got any further last comments? Councillor Watts?
Yeah, really. So, having obviously this pilot was carried out in Thornwell and in the Bulwark area, so I was kind of aware of, well, not initially, but I did kind of play catch up on it a little bit regarding what this potentially could mean and what it might look like. And I guess my only concern here is that the existing play provision, whilst I know the focus seemed to be on how they could possibly extend the play into at a term time in a holiday time and using those facilities, that kind of makes a lot of sense to me, particularly with the I guess from a safeguarding perspective, and then also the size of the facility it's a no-brainer really, isn't it? I just wanted to make a point, if I may, Chair, about the way historically it was extended out to Bulwark, and the mindset, the reasoning for it, which it should be apparent, is that the focus is that it has the demographic, really, the amount of people that young families that work and live there, and also it's the concentration of population. Actually, what Louise should know is that it has the highest concentration of population of that specific demographic. So it only makes sense, really, that the focus should move away from possibly the leisure centre, which has been rightly pointed out is very difficult for some people to get to, and the focus should be more localised. I guess my concern here, though, is that it was an initial question I had, is then the existing play provision that we have, particularly in more semi-urban areas, is poor. You know, so for example, the Dell, and I know, you know, Mike's going to start to wilt now when I start bringing up the issue of you know, the legalities of who owns the land and what they can do with it and liaison with the community. But there is a genuine will from parents. You can see a grassroots movement for people to see an improvement in the play facilities that we would have enjoyed ourselves as children. And we don't see that as any, I don't see really any examples of best practice in that provision. And again, I know you'll expect me to say, if you go to Bristol and you look at Blaze, I know parents that will take their kids in a car, go to Blaze, it's 6-7 miles away, and it's a fantastic facility. But there is no Blaze from Mega, from Roggett to Caldicott to Chepstow. And when you think about the concentration of population, and you think about the existing, we're looking at LDP and future thinking about how we have play and communities, I don't see any focus on that here. And that's what concerns me, really, because you know, those areas are, I guess, you know, when on a nice sunny day you're there, it's a pleasure to be live watching your children play in a communal area. Everybody's enjoying what, you know, what I'd like to think society's all about, really.
Perhaps if I could respond to that, Chair. I think that's a very fair point, and I think perhaps that's something that we need to think about, how we can feed that into the dialogue that we've got in terms of the action plan going forward. It was something that Mike and I were just talking about when we were waiting outside, was how the review of the existing play areas needs to reflect some of the potential pressures that may come through new further development, etc., etc. So I think that is part of looking at that, how we review that approach to overall play provision, particularly the fixed play provision. And you're absolutely right. I think there are some good examples across the county of, particularly in Usk as an example of where sort of parents' action has brought together significant improvement in play. I think one of the things that people have struggled with, in a sense, is that area that we've struggled a bit, is getting beneath the skin of the local information about demand, etc., etc. So hopefully, if we, I think that's one of the strengths of what has happened in your ward in terms of the project. It's started to provide some of that sort of data, if you like, from children, which can help support funding applications, etc., etc. I think one of the more interesting things that come out of that, though, is that, and I think I referred to that in the report, is that actually, in terms of encouraging more play outside, it's a lot of the same issues come up that are sort of local environmental quality issues. They're not actually really just play issues. They're the same issues that you no doubt get on the doorstep in terms of dog mess, glass on playing fields, traffic being too fast, etc., etc. It's sort of, sometimes we put things in boxes, and actually it's actually about local environmental quality, a lot of it. It's not to say we don't need fixed play provision, but children will play where they will play as well. And that's the other thing that came out of it, that actually the areas where children play most were not the areas where there were fixed play equipment, which might say something about where we put the fixed play equipment as well. But that's, if we could, our feeling is if we could do a little bit more of that in the coming period of the next 3-year period of the plan, we'd actually get into a much better place in terms of being able to plan and make future provision.
Right, thank you. I'm going to wind this up now, and in doing so, make the point that I made at our November meeting, which is that if plans go ahead, then as a county council, we will not be directly responsible for the provision of play, which will pass to Mon Life. And yet, as a county council, we will still have statutory duties in relation to funding from the Welsh Government. So one thing I would ask as an action point is that both Mon Life, or the shadow board of Mon Life as it currently is, but also our own cabinet, make sure that there are protocols and systems in place to ensure that when we need as a council to get grants, they can be passed through effectively to the people who will be delivering the play opportunities. I think in conclusion, there has been general support for the proposal set out here, with perhaps the small proviso that members have spoken about the need in perhaps some of the more rural communities for more play. And I think as a committee, we would ask that you look at that to see how that can be taken forward. But the consensus from discussion has clearly been that there is much to admire in the plans that you've brought to us. We do take the point that you made that it's a shame that some elements of grant come at the last minute from the Welsh Government, and as a committee we have raised our anxieties about that. And let's hope in future years there is a more constructive planning for the way in which play allocation funds are sent out. So thank you both very much indeed for that. We appreciate your time. Moving quickly on so that we finish before County Council begins. If we could move on then to item 9. We have 2 lots of minutes to consider from our last 2 meetings. I don't intend to go through them in detail. You've had the minutes for a week or more. Are there any matters that are arising from them? Okay, moving on then. Are you happy that I accept those minutes? One item that I did promise Mr. Fowler and Miss Wakeley that I would comment on is that you remember that at the January meeting there was discussion and withdrawal of the proposed protocol between the local authority and school governing bodies, and that was withdrawn so that the views of the Monmouthshire Association of School Governors could be taken into greater consideration. I chaired a meeting earlier this week. There has been a very satisfactory resolution to that, and when that is written up, because officers haven't had time to make slight amendments to the planning yet, but that will come to our next meeting for approval. Other than that, I have no matters that have been actions. Ms. Eilert?
Chair, you'll notice on the action sheet there's the consideration of CENCOM, which came today, so that's been actioned. The other action is the one you've just referred to, and the other one is in relation to the budget proposals that you scrutinised in January. So I'll check on that, Chair, and make sure that's been added. Do you want me just to take you through to the work programme?
Yeah.
Okay, you've got the work programme in front of you. I believe that there were some additions to the work programme that were made following the last meeting, so I'll make sure those are incorporated. But arising particularly from today's discussion was the need to schedule in an opportunity to consider the future of Mountain House. Also, in sort of my backlog of emails some time ago, I've had a request for you to look at school catchment areas. I believe that's out to consultation at the moment, and you agreed as a committee that you'd like sight of that either before it went to consultation or after, or both. And I think the decision was that it would come after consultation. So with that proposal, Chair, we could combine both of those issues in a special meeting, which would need to take place in March, mid-March, possibly towards the 3rd and 4th week of March, prior to Cabinet decision on the 3rd of April. Is that okay?
Yeah, well, members have already agreed to the Mountain House meeting, so I think it would be an excellent opportunity to put that other item in as well. So,
I don't propose we go through dates at the moment, because we'll have to sort of look at officer availability, but we'll come back to you.
And the final Council and Cabinet work planner, Councillor Watts.
To thank the committee and the chair especially for letting me come along and bore you some more with my sometimes I know you probably had similar questions before, but I do appreciate your patience, and I would ask you to just extend that for 1 minute. So I have a question that I wanted to, it could either be part of your programme, I could either put it in writing, I wanted to take advice from this committee. But it was reported last week after the Newport County game that one of the youth team players had met then Raheem Sterling, who plays for Man City after that famous FA Cup game. That they had a meeting, and Raheem Sterling had written on request then from the boy's grandmother to this lad, who is, I believe, got a youth contract with County, regarding some bullying that had taken place in one of the comprehensives in Monmouthshire. And I was concerned by it because, you know, I have a mixed race family, and I was concerned about the level of reporting and how we support our young children. Isn't, you know, racist bullying isn't just bullying. Depending on the age, it can be a crime of hate. And I was curious, really, to know that we do provide a joint service with the community liaison group. I'm sure I've got the title of that wrong. We work with the same amount of local authorities that CENCOM is in a communal project, and the police on this. And I wondered whether or not we could find out how it's reported, how many incidents that we've had, and whether it's underreported, Chair. And I wasn't really sure I could put that forward. I could have obviously put the question to full council, but I would have probably got quite a dry answer. But I just wanted to open this up really in this committee.
I think this is the proper venue to bring that. I think schools have a statutory duty to report racist incidents, and certainly I think we would want some evidence before we take that. But perhaps that's a third issue that could be put onto the agenda for our special meeting. Councillor Powell.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I'm a Link Governor for Wellbeing in King Henry School, and I work with Mark Stockham, who's very good. And this is one of the things, we had a meeting not so long ago, a government meeting, which we highlighted this, so that all governors, it's their responsibility to to take note of anything like that, whether it's racial or any other sort of bullying, because it matters. It's better to bring something to the knowledge of Mark, even if it comes to be nothing, than not do it when there is something. And it is something I expect the other schools are the same, but it is important. So.
Mr. Strong.
Yeah. Chair, you referred there to racist incidents. Can we make sure we widen that to all the categories under the Equalities Act?
Yes, yeah.
Yes, there's a general
sure was the
nodding,
intention,
so
yeah.
I'd be happy. I think committee would agree with that. Councillor Brown.
Yeah, I think you've got to be careful on these things because in relation to individual cases, I think you're looking really here for as a committee as in terms of procedure rather than individual cases, because obviously individual cases are allegations until they are proven or otherwise. So I think you've got to be careful about making sure that you're looking at procedures as such.
Indeed, you're quite right, and I think in a brief discussion with Councillor Watt earlier, there was concern that the issue might not have been recorded or reported within the school concerned. So it's very much about procedures and how the authority can monitor and ensure that incidents are dealt with effectively. It is 20-1. If I could thank members for their forbearance, it's been a long meeting, but we've got through some meaty stuff, and I thank you all for your attendance today.